Greenland's story begins long before human memory. It begins in deep geological time, when the Earth itself was still forming its continents. The landmass we now call Greenland rests upon some of the oldest exposed rock on the planet. In southwestern Greenland, geological formations date back nearly 4 billion years. These rocks formed during the earliest periods of Earth's crust, long before complex life emerged. Over hundreds of millions of years, tectonic forces shaped and reshaped the region. Greenland was once connected to other ancient landmasses that later drifted apart as continental plates shifted. During the last ice age, which reached its peak roughly 20,000 years ago, enormous glaciers expanded across the northern hemisphere. Greenland became almost entirely buried beneath a vast ice sheet. As the climate warmed at the end of the Ice Age, glaciers retreated from much of Europe and North America. In Greenland, however, the ice sheet endured. Even today, it covers roughly 80% of the island's surface and contains enough frozen water to raise global sea levels by more than 7 meters if it were to melt entirely. The island's geography is defined by this ice. Along the coast, steep fjords cut deep into the land, carved by ancient glaciers. Inland, the ice sheet stretches outward in a white expanse, rising to elevations of more than 3,000 meters in some places. Greenland is geographically part of the North American tectonic plate, yet politically and historically it has been tied to Europe. This dual identity, American in geology, European in governance, has shaped much of its history. But for thousands of years after the Ice Age, Greenland remained uninhabited. The Arctic environment was extreme. Winter darkness could last for months in the far north. Temperatures frequently dropped far below freezing. Sea ice formed thick barriers along the coast. Only highly specialized societies could survive in such conditions. The first known human settlement in Greenland dates to approximately 2,500 before Common Era. These early inhabitants likely crossed from Arctic Canada during a period when sea ice conditions allowed migration by small boats or over frozen channels. Archaeologists identify this earliest culture as the Sakak culture, named after archaeological discoveries on Greenland's west coast. The Sakak people were part of a broader group of Arctic cultures, sometimes referred to as Paleo-Eskimo societies. They lived primarily along the western coastline, where access to marine mammals provided a reliable food source. Their survival depended on seal hunting, fishing, and seasonal movement. They constructed small dwellings from available materials such as stone, bone, and turf. Their tools were carefully crafted from flint and bone, reflecting a detailed understanding of Arctic conditions. Life for the Sakak people was shaped by mobility and adaptation. Greenland's environment required constant adjustment to seasonal changes. Hunting patterns followed the migration of animals. Communities were small and likely semi-nomadic. Archaeological evidence suggests they endured for nearly 2,000 years. Around 800 before Common Era, however, the Sakak culture disappeared. The reasons remain uncertain. Climate shifts may have altered sea ice patterns or animal migration routes. Resource pressures could have played a role. What is clear is that Greenland did not maintain continuous habitation during this early period. Centuries later, a new Arctic culture emerged, the Dorset culture. Arriving perhaps around the 1st centuries BCE or CE, the Dorset people inhabited parts of Greenland and other Arctic regions. They developed distinctive artistic traditions, including carved figurines and unique tool styles. Like their predecessors, they relied heavily on seal hunting through breathing holes in sea ice. The Dorset culture endured for many centuries, but began to decline by around 1300 Common Era. By that time, another migration was underway, one that would permanently shape Greenland's demographic and cultural identity. The Thule people, the ancestors of today's Inuit population, began moving eastward from Alaska across Arctic Canada around the 12th century. Their migration was one of the most remarkable human expansions in Arctic history. Within a relatively short period, they spread across thousands of kilometers of harsh terrain. The Thule possessed technological advantages that distinguished them from earlier Arctic cultures. They used dog sleds for winter travel, allowing rapid movement across snow and ice. They built large open boats known as umiaks for transporting families and goods during the summer months. They perfected whale hunting techniques that enabled them to harvest bowhead whales, a resource capable of sustaining entire communities. By the 13th century, Thule communities were established across Greenland's coasts. Unlike previous cultures, they maintained a continuous presence that extends into modern times. The language, traditions, and subsistence practices of modern Greenlandic Inuit communities trace directly to these Thule ancestors. While Arctic societies were adapting to life in Greenland, developments in Europe were gradually bringing the island into a broader historical network. In the late 10th century, Norse explorers from Scandinavia were expanding westward across the North Atlantic. Iceland had already been settled. Stories circulated of lands further west. In 982 Common Era, a Norwegian Icelandic explorer named Erik the Red was exiled from Iceland following a series of violent disputes. During his exile, he sailed west and explored Greenland's southwestern coastline. Upon returning to Iceland, he described fertile valleys and suitable grazing lands, and he named the territory Greenland, possibly to encourage settlement. In 985 Common Era, Erik led a fleet of settlers to Greenland. Though several ships were lost during the journey, enough arrived to establish two primary settlements: the eastern settlement near present-day Qaqortoq and the western settlement near present-day Nuuk. At their height, the Norse settlements likely supported a population of between 2,000 and 3,000 people. They built farms, churches, and community halls. Archaeological remains reveal stone foundations of dwellings and evidence of livestock farming, including cattle, sheep, and goats. The Norse Greenlanders maintained trade links with Europe. Walrus ivory, prized in medieval Europe for carving religious artifacts and luxury goods, was one of their primary exports. In return, they imported iron tools, and timber, and other necessities. Greenland became formally incorporated into the Norwegian kingdom in the 13th century. When Denmark and Norway later united under a single crown, Greenland became part of that realm as well. Yet life in Norse Greenland was precarious. Farming was difficult in marginal Arctic conditions. The onset of the Little Ice Age during the 14th century brought colder temperatures and increased sea ice. Trade routes became less reliable. European demand for walrus ivory declined as alternative sources became available. By the early 1400s, the Western settlement had disappeared. By the late 15th century, the Eastern settlement also vanished. When later European expeditions arrived, they found only ruins. The disappearance of the Norse settlements remains a subject of scholarly debate. Climate deterioration likely played a role. Economic isolation may have contributed. Unlike the Inuit, who relied on flexible hunting strategies, the Norse remained committed to European-style farming and livestock. Their society proved less adaptable to environmental change. By contrast, Inuit communities continued to thrive along Greenland's coasts. For several centuries after the Norse disappearance, Greenland remained largely beyond sustained European attention. Knowledge of its existence persisted in maps and records, but direct contact was sporadic. This relative isolation ended in the early 18th century. In 1721, Danish-Norwegian missionary Hans Egede sailed to Greenland with the aim of locating the lost Norse Christians and re-establishing Christian faith among them. He found no Norse descendants. Instead, he encountered Inuit communities. Egede began missionary efforts among the Inuit and established trading posts along the west coast. Over time, Denmark asserted colonial authority over Greenland. A royal trade monopoly was established, controlling all commerce between Greenland and the outside world. This monopoly limited foreign access and shielded Greenland from some external exploitation. However, it also restricted economic diversification and kept Greenland heavily dependent on Danish administration. Throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, Greenland remained a relatively isolated colony. Fishing and sealing formed the backbone of the economy. Danish administrators governed coastal settlements, while Inuit communities adapted to gradual changes in trade, religion, and education. By the early 20th century, Greenland's position within the Danish realm was firmly established, though its strategic importance had yet to fully emerge. That transformation would occur during the Second World War. When the Second World War reached Northern Europe in April 1940, Greenland's place in world affairs changed almost overnight. Nazi Germany invaded and occupied Denmark within hours. With Copenhagen under German control, communication between Greenland and the Danish government was abruptly severed. The island, long administered as a distant colony, suddenly found itself politically isolated but strategically exposed. Greenland's location between North America and Europe gave it immediate importance. Control of the North Atlantic was critical to both Allied and Axis powers. Weather forecasting, in particular, became a matter of military necessity. Storm systems that developed over Greenland moved eastward toward Europe. Accurate forecasts could influence naval operations, air campaigns, and amphibious landings. Recognizing the strategic risk of leaving Greenland vulnerable, the United States moved swiftly. Although still officially neutral in 1940, American officials feared that Germany might attempt to establish bases in Greenland to support submarine and air operations. In 1941, the United States signed an agreement with the Danish ambassador in Washington, Henrik Kaufmann, who acted independently of the German-occupied Danish government. The agreement permitted the United States to establish military facilities in Greenland for its defense. American forces constructed airfields and weather stations along the coast. These installations served as refueling and staging points for aircraft traveling between North America and Europe. They also provided critical meteorological data. Greenland had entered the strategic map of the modern world. When the war ended in 1945, the United States did not entirely withdraw. A new geopolitical reality was emerging. The alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union dissolved rapidly into suspicion and rivalry. The Cold War had begun. In this new confrontation, geography once again elevated Greenland's importance. The shortest route between the continental United States and the Soviet Union lay across the Arctic. Any long-range bomber or intercontinental ballistic missile launched between the two superpowers would likely traverse polar airspace. Greenland sat directly beneath this path. In 1951, Denmark, restored as a sovereign government after the war, signed a formal defense agreement with the United States, and this agreement allowed continued American military presence in Greenland. The most significant installation was Thule Air Base, constructed in the far northwest of the island. Building Thule was an immense logistical undertaking. Supplies and construction materials had to be transported through icy waters and assembled in extreme Arctic conditions. Yet within a few years, the base became fully operational. It served as a key component of the United States ballistic missile early warning system. Radar arrays scanned the skies for incoming Soviet missiles, providing vital minutes of warning in the event of an attack. The Arctic was no longer a remote frontier. It was a front line in a nuclear standoff. In 1959, American military planners initiated an even more ambitious project. Beneath Greenland's ice sheet, they constructed Camp Century, a research installation located approximately 240 kilometers east of Thule. Officially, Camp Century was described as a scientific experiment designed to test the feasibility of building and sustaining facilities under polar ice. In reality, it formed part of a broader concept known as Project Iceworm. Project Iceworm envisioned a vast network of tunnels carved beneath the ice sheet, housing mobile nuclear missile launch sites. The idea was to deploy hundreds of missiles in constantly shifting underground positions, making them difficult for Soviet forces to detect or target. Greenland's thick ice was seen as natural protection. Camp Century included prefabricated living quarters, laboratories, a chapel, and even a small portable nuclear reactor to supply electricity. And soldiers lived for extended periods beneath the ice, conducting scientific research and engineering tests. However, the ice sheet proved unpredictable. Unlike solid rock, glacial ice moves slowly over time. Tunnels compressed and warped under immense pressure. Maintenance demands increased beyond sustainable levels. By 1967, Camp Century was abandoned. Project Iceworm was never fully implemented. The episode revealed both the strategic value and the environmental complexity of Greenland. Cold War tensions were further underscored in 1968, when a US B-52 bomber carrying 4 nuclear weapons crashed near Thule Air Base after an onboard fire. Although the bombs did not detonate in a nuclear explosion, radioactive material was released onto the ice. A major cleanup operation followed, and conducted under harsh Arctic conditions. The accident heightened awareness of the risks associated with militarization in such an environment. While global powers positioned Greenland within their defense strategies, Greenlandic society itself was undergoing profound transformation. In 1953, Denmark formally ended Greenland's colonial status and integrated it as a county within the Kingdom of Denmark. This change aimed to modernize governance and extend welfare state benefits to Greenland's population. Infrastructure projects expanded housing, healthcare, and education systems. Danish became increasingly prominent in administration and schooling. Modernization brought improvements in living standards, yet it also disrupted traditional ways of life. And many smaller settlements were consolidated into larger towns to improve service delivery. Families were relocated. Wage labor in fishing and public services gradually replaced subsistence hunting as the primary economic activity in many regions. Cultural tensions emerged. Greenlandic language and Inuit traditions faced pressure from Danish administrative models. A new generation of Greenlanders, educated in Danish institutions, began to question the colonial legacy and advocate for greater political autonomy. By the 1970s, political consciousness had strengthened significantly. One major catalyst was Denmark's entry into the European Economic Community in 1973. Greenland automatically became part of the EEC, despite local opposition. Concerns centered largely on fishing rights, towards as European vessels gained access to Greenlandic waters. Fishing remained, and continues to be, the cornerstone of Greenland's economy. Control over marine resources was not merely symbolic. It was fundamental to economic survival. In response to growing demands for self-determination, Denmark granted Greenland home rule in 1979, following a referendum. This reform transferred authority over many domestic matters, including education, fisheries, and social policy, to Greenland's own parliament and government. For the first time, Greenlanders exercised significant political control over internal affairs. In 1985, Greenland withdrew from the European Economic Community after another referendum, becoming the only territory ever to leave the organization. However, it maintained special agreements regarding trade and fisheries. And the next major constitutional step occurred in 2009 with the implementation of the Self-Government Act. Approved by referendum, the act expanded Greenland's authority further, granting control over the judicial system, law enforcement, and, crucially, natural resources. The act also formally recognized Greenlanders as a distinct people under international law, with the right to self-determination. In principle, this opened the possibility of full independence, should Greenland choose that path in the future. Yet economic realities complicated the issue. Denmark continued to provide substantial annual financial transfers, which supported a significant portion of Greenland's public budget. Achieving full independence would require economic diversification beyond fisheries and public administration. See, it was at this juncture that global climate change began reshaping Greenland's international relevance. The Arctic has warmed at nearly 4 times the global average rate in recent decades. Greenland's ice sheet has been losing mass at accelerating speed. Satellite measurements show hundreds of billions of tons of ice melting annually. The implications for global sea levels are profound. If Greenland's ice were to melt entirely, a process that would take centuries but is theoretically possible, it would raise global sea levels by more than 7 meters. However, melting ice also exposes mineral resources previously inaccessible. Geological surveys indicate that Greenland contains deposits of rare earth elements, zinc, uranium, iron ore, and potentially offshore oil and gas reserves. Rare earth elements are essential components in modern technology, including electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones, and advanced military systems. Currently, global supply chains for these materials are heavily concentrated in a small number of countries. For the United States and European nations seeking to diversify supply sources, Greenland represents a potential alternative. Simultaneously, Arctic sea routes are becoming more navigable during summer months as sea ice retreats. The northern sea route along Russia's coastline has already seen increased traffic. Future transpolar shipping routes could reduce travel distances between Asia and Europe significantly. Greenland occupies a strategic position near these evolving maritime corridors. Russia has invested heavily in Arctic military infrastructure, reopening and expanding bases across its northern territories. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and has invested in polar research and infrastructure projects, describing its approach as part of a polar Silk Road. The United States, recognizing the shifting balance of Arctic power, has renewed its strategic focus on the region. Greenland remains central to this recalibration. Pituffik Space Base, the successor to Thule Air Base, continues to serve as a critical component of missile detection and space surveillance systems. The Arctic remains the shortest route for potential missile trajectories between Russia and North America. In addition, Greenland lies near the Greenland-Iceland-United Kingdom Gap, commonly known as the GIUK Gap, a strategic maritime corridor monitored during the Cold War to track submarine movements between the Arctic and the Atlantic. This passage remains relevant for NATO naval operations today. In recent years, public discussion of Greenland's importance intensified when American political leaders expressed interest in acquiring the island. Although Denmark and Greenland rejected the idea outright, the episode underscored a broader reality. Greenland is no longer peripheral to global strategy. Today, Greenland faces a complex future shaped by environmental transformation, economic opportunity, and geopolitical competition. Debates over independence continue within Greenlandic politics. Some argue that control over natural resources could provide the foundation for sovereign statehood, and others caution that economic sustainability, environmental protection, and social stability must remain priorities. Greenland's population remains small, approximately 57,000 people, spread across vast and often isolated coastal communities. Its cultural identity remains deeply rooted in Inuit heritage, even as modern governance structures link it to Denmark and global institutions. From prehistoric Arctic migrations to Viking settlements, from Danish colonial administration to Cold War militarization, from autonomy movements to climate-driven geopolitical attention, Greenland's history has been shaped by adaptation. It has endured climate shifts, external control, strategic exploitation, and political transformation. And in the 21st century, as the Arctic becomes increasingly central to global affairs, Greenland stands not at the margin of the world, but near its strategic center. In the decades ahead, Greenland is likely to become even more significant than it is today. For most of its recorded history, Greenland existed at the margins of global power. It was distant, difficult to access, and sparsely populated. Its harsh climate discouraged settlement. Its economy remained limited. Even during the Cold War, its importance was largely strategic, but narrowly defined: a radar outpost, an early warning station, a remote node in a global defense system. That era has passed. The next 30 years will redefine Greenland's role in international politics, and at the center of that transformation lies the strategic calculation of the United States. Geography remains the foundation. The Arctic is the shortest route between North America and Eurasia. Any long-range missile, aircraft, or future hypersonic system traveling between major powers is likely to traverse polar airspace. As missile technology advances, with faster speeds, maneuverable trajectories, and space-based systems, early detection becomes even more critical. The United States relies on northern radar arrays and space surveillance infrastructure to maintain strategic stability. Greenland provides one of the most vital vantage points for that network. Pituffik Space Base continues to function as a key element in global missile warning architecture. In the coming decades, as space becomes more contested and as rival powers develop anti-satellite capabilities and advanced delivery systems, Arctic-based detection and tracking systems will grow in importance rather than diminish. But military surveillance is only part of the equation. And climate change is fundamentally altering the Arctic environment. The region is warming at a rate far exceeding the global average. Sea ice coverage has declined dramatically in recent decades. What was once permanently frozen ocean is now navigable for increasing portions of the year. This shift transforms maritime geography. New shipping routes across the Arctic shorten travel distances between Asia and Europe. These routes reduce fuel costs and transit times. Although seasonal and still challenging, Arctic navigation is expected to expand as technology improves and ice continues to retreat. Greenland sits near emerging polar corridors. Its ports and airspace lie close to routes that may become commercially viable within the next few decades. Control over infrastructure, monitoring of maritime traffic, and search and rescue capabilities in Arctic waters will become strategic responsibilities. At the same time, the retreat of ice exposes mineral potential. Rare earth elements have become indispensable to modern industrial society. Electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones, missile guidance systems, radar technologies, and advanced computing all depend on them. Global supply chains for these materials are concentrated in limited regions, creating strategic vulnerabilities. Greenland's geological surveys indicate deposits of rare earth elements, as well as zinc, iron ore, uranium, and other critical minerals. Extraction is technically difficult and environmentally sensitive, yet the long-term demand for these materials is expected to grow substantially. For the United States, diversifying supply chains is not merely an economic goal, it is a national security objective. Dependence on geopolitical competitors for essential industrial inputs creates strategic risk. Greenland offers a potential alternative source within the broader Western Alliance structure. This resource dimension intersects with another strategic development: renewed great power competition in the Arctic. Russia has significantly expanded its Arctic military footprint. It has modernized airfields, deployed advanced missile systems, and invested in nuclear-powered icebreakers capable of operating year-round. Moscow views the Arctic as a critical economic and security zone. China, while geographically distant, has declared itself a stakeholder in Arctic governance. It has increased scientific presence, invested in polar-capable vessels, and sought infrastructure partnerships in Arctic regions. Although China does not possess territorial claims in the Arctic, its long-term interest reflects a broader ambition to participate in emerging polar trade routes and resource development. For Washington, preventing rival powers from establishing strategic footholds in Greenland is a priority. The island's political status, autonomous within the Kingdom of Denmark, places it within NATO's sphere. Yet Greenland's small population and developing economy make it sensitive to external investment offers. American policymakers understand that influence in Greenland is not solely about military bases. It involves infrastructure investment, economic partnerships, research cooperation, and diplomatic engagement. Over the next 30 years, our Arctic governance will likely become more contested. International law, environmental protection agreements, indigenous rights, and maritime boundaries will intersect with strategic competition. Greenland's leadership will navigate relationships with Denmark, the United States, and other global actors. The United States does not need Greenland in the sense of territorial expansion. Rather, it needs stability, access, and strategic alignment in Greenland. It needs reliable missile warning infrastructure in the Arctic. It needs secure maritime corridors in a warming polar region. It needs diversified access to critical minerals. It needs to ensure that adversarial powers do not gain strategic leverage near North American airspace, and it needs strong alliances in the North Atlantic. The Greenland lies at the intersection of all these concerns. The next 30 years will likely see increased American engagement in Arctic policy, greater investment in polar research and infrastructure, and continued defense cooperation with Greenlandic authorities. At the same time, Greenland itself will shape this future. The island retains the right to determine its political destiny. Independence remains a subject of debate within Greenlandic society. Economic sustainability, environmental stewardship, and cultural preservation are central concerns. Greenland's story has always been defined by adaptation to climate, to trade networks, to colonial authority, to superpower rivalry. Today, adaptation once again defines its future. As ice melts and shipping lanes open, as minerals become strategic commodities, as missile technology evolves and global competition intensifies, Greenland stands not at the edge of the world, but at the center of a changing one. From the first Arctic hunters who crossed frozen seas, to Viking settlers seeking farmland at the world's edge, to Cold War engineers building tunnels beneath glaciers, to modern policymakers debating autonomy and security, Greenland's history reveals a constant truth. Geography shapes destiny, but people determine how that destiny unfolds. And in the Arctic century now emerging, Greenland will matter more than ever before. If this documentary helped you understand Greenland in a deeper way, consider supporting the channel. Like the video so more people can discover the story of the Arctic. Share it with someone interested in global history and geopolitics. And subscribe for more long-form, in-depth documentaries exploring the forces that shape our world. History is not just about the past, it explains the future. Thank you for watching.